Hi, my name is Mary Kate Carroll, and today we will be discussing a conflict of interest case between a nurse Jane and her friend Sarah, who works for an infusion company. This video will discuss the scenario, describe the ethical dilemma, and then describe how Jane decides what ethical decision to make. Jane is a new case manager on a cardiac unit at a well-known organization. One part of her job is setting up home infusions like inotropes or IV antibiotics for patients. There are a few different infusion companies that are used depending on the patient's insurance, one of them being InfuseCorp, and Jane's friend Sarah works for InfuseCorp. One day, Sarah asked if Jane would like to meet her for lunch so they could catch up. She said she was excited to learn that she was a part of the cardiac unit at the organization and wanted to hear more about her new role. Jane decided to go to lunch. Jane arrived to lunch that day, excited to see a close friend. After finishing lunch, Sarah said that she wanted to pay because she was excited that Jane had a new job. She said to consider it a celebration. Jane was grateful that she paid for lunch and thought it was a nice gesture. After they paid for lunch, Sarah told Jane she wanted to show her something that may help in her new role. Sarah pulled out a bunch of pamphlets and information packets for patients and started discussing why InfuseCorp was the best infusion company for patients and why the cardiac unit should use their services rather than other competing companies. She gave all the information to Jane and asked if she would consider choosing her company for all of the infusion needs she had in the future. She even said that if InfuseCorp didn't accept a patient's insurance, she would find a way to cover it or find a loophole with her manager. Jane felt very uncomfortable. She knew that as an employee, she was not supposed to take bribes and that only using one specific infusion company was a conflict of interest. But her and Sarah were friends, and she trusted her and thought InfuseCorp could benefit her patients. She told Sarah that she did not know if this was a great idea, and she thought she would get in trouble with her manager in the organization. But Sarah said, "Well, you just let me pay for your lunch with my company card, and we are friends. Having someone from a company pay for your food is against the policy of your company, so if you don't try to accommodate my business or give me the most business from your patients, I'm going to tell your manager." Jane didn't know what to do. She was afraid that she would get in trouble for having Sarah pay for her food and give her all of the information packets without her knowing her intent. But she was also concerned because she didn't want to give all of her service to InfuseCorp because it was a conflict of interest, and some patients' insurance plans might not be covered. She started considering ways to get Sarah more business, thinking, it can't hurt anyone that bad if I start giving them more business. Maybe I can just throw a couple extra cases her way. So why is this an ethical dilemma? In this case, Jane is between a rock and a hard place, but is there really an ethical breach? In order to answer this, we must look at motivation, opportunity, and rationalization. The motivation in this case is Sarah's desire for money. Typically, this is not a problem, but Sarah is putting Jane in a position in which she could get fired due to a conflict of interest if her boss finds out. The motivation behind how Sarah is trying to get this money is unethical. The opportunity is considered the door that would relieve the pressure off of Jane. At this point, Jane has to find a way to discuss the lunch with her boss without getting fired, or decide that she will find a way to get more business for Sarah and InfuseCorp. The opportunity here would be to figure out a solution in which she does not lose her job or get in trouble with her boss, but also a solution in which she does not have to unethically provide more business to Sarah and InfuseCorp. Rationalization is the last piece to finding if there is an ethical breach. Jane tries to rationalize her decision when she says it can't hurt anyone that bad. Maybe she can just throw a couple cases her way. Rationalization occurs when a person is trying to justify something they know is wrong. In this case, Jane knows that giving cases to Sarah because she can't get in trouble with her boss is wrong, but she tries to rationalize the decision by saying it won't hurt anybody. After assessing the motivation, opportunity, and rationalization in this scenario, there is an obvious ethical breach that needs to be addressed. There are many examples in this scenario of unethical behavior. One example is how Sarah buys Jane lunch to try to get more business from the organization. This is also considered a conflict of interest, which is considered unethical in companies because it gives a competitive advantage to one company over another. Overall, the organization is not supposed to support just one company, especially as a healthcare provider. There was also an instance of Jane violating the rules by unknowingly taking free lunch from Sarah while she was trying to give her information about the company. This is a rule at many companies because of the conflict of interest that it causes. So what should Jane do? Jane knew that she should take a dual process approach when making any decisions, as she needed to consider both logic and emotion. She also knew that she could not go off of her gut reaction and needed to take the proper steps to make this decision. Before making any decisions, Jane has to go through the decision-making process, which includes determining the facts and stating the problem, stating the stakeholders, identifying relevant factors, developing a list of options, applying some tests, and selecting an option. First, Jane tried to determine the facts and state the problem. The problem was that Sarah was asking her to give her company more business when Jane needed to set up infusions for her patients and told her that if she decided not to, she would tell her boss that she unethically let Sarah buy her lunch and discuss the company, putting her in a conflict of interest scenario which could get her into a lot of trouble and possibly get her fired. Sarah also said that she would try to get discount medications if a patient's insurance did not use InfuseCorp, which could also be considered insurance fraud. Jane felt like she either needed to give her more business or get fired, causing an ethical dilemma for Jane. Jane then considered the stakeholders in this dilemma. These included Jane, Sarah, InfuseCorp, Jane's organization, Jane's boss, and most importantly, the patients and their insurance companies. Jane knew that patients might not be able to afford medications if she only gave business to InfuseCorp, because not all insurance plans covered InfuseCorp's business. She also knew that this would be considered a conflict of interest since she knows Sarah and their friends, and if she was only using this company, this did not connect with the organization's business values. Jane was worried that she would get fired if Sarah told her boss, but more importantly, she was worried about what would happen to her patients and the infusions that they would need if she only used InfuseCorp. Jane then listed out the relevant factors. She knew that her company did not allow employees to have lunches paid for by other companies, and it was considered a conflict of interest if Jane chose InfuseCorp over other companies due to her friendship with Sarah. Jane also considered the concepts of her own social responsibility and corporate citizenship. She believed that she had a duty to consider the social variables, meaning her patients, and the financial burden that this may take on them if she only uses this infusion company, and how this would affect the hospital as a whole. Something else that Jane considered was the principal agent theory, which stated that she, as an employee of the organization, had a responsibility to consider the organization's guidelines, policies, and rules before making any decisions. She knew that choosing one infusion company over any other because of a friendship did not align with the policies and procedures of her organization. Jane considered three options. The first option is that she could take Sarah up on the discount and only provide services from InfuseCorp while trying to figure out how the insurance would cover the rest of the cost. This would also include not providing patients with any decisions in the company that they use for this service. The second would be to still provide other infusion companies with business, but prioritize InfuseCorp over the others. And the third would be to be upfront with her boss and tell her about the lunch with Sarah and how it was paid for without her knowing the circumstance at first, and then tell Sarah that she would use InfuseCorp when she thought it was an appropriate option for the patient. At this point, Jane did some tests to consider each option. She did the legality test, the defensibility test, and the golden rule test. With the legality test, Jane asked herself which option was legal. She knew that neither one or two were legal since it was a conflict of interest and patients did not have the autonomy to choose their own services. She believed that the right thing to do with this test was option number 3. She then did the defensibility test and realized that she could not rationalize either one or two to any of her peers because they would all think that this was a conflict of interest and not in the best interest of the patient. The last test that she considered was the golden rule test. She asked herself if she were a patient or her boss, which option would she choose? She knew she should support a patient's autonomy and the right for them to make their own decisions, and that she should be honest with her boss. After going through this decision-making process, Jane made the decision to speak with her boss about the lunch and explain what happened. Jane knew that as an ethical leader, it was important for her to show her integrity and face her mistakes head on, and she also knew that making true and honest decisions was the foundation of being an ethical nurse leader at her organization and for her patients. Her boss was very grateful that she was honest about the whole situation, and they discussed the decision-making process when choosing an infusion company for each patient so they could ensure the policies and procedures in that organization were just. Jane left this decision knowing she made the best ethical decision that was right for her, the organization, and her patients.